By the time The Gathering dropped in 1999, Testament was a band that was undergoing a lot of changes, while at the same time also dealing with a lot of things kind of off of the stage, off of the studio, I guess, if you really want to go with that, going with the whole off-the-field metaphor, and it worked pretty poorly. With The Gathering, though, they still wanted to channel a lot of that anger. They wanted to channel a lot of that that musical angst within their sound, and the result was an album that was very, very highly acclaimed. For 1999 standards, Testament was a band that was trying to kind of survive in an era and an age that was being dominated at that stage of the game by the nu metal scene here in America. It was something where bands such as Korn and Limp Bizkit and the early inklings of Disturbed and Slipknot were really ruling the airwaves. Meanwhile, Testament was churning out a hybrid of melodic thrash that also had incorporations of death metal somewhat, at least on the lyrical and the vocal side, as opposed to what you were hearing from a lot of the other bands that were out there that were getting significant radio airplay. That being said, this was an album that was praised by a lot of critics, not to mention praised by a lot of fans by having some really, really great material, not to mention the way in which they were able to mix up these two elements of their trademark sound is something that made a lot of people feel that The Gathering had all of the inklings of a classic and very trademark Testament album. Really right from the get-go, whenever you listen to DNR, Do Not Resuscitate, you really start to understand this very, very well. You start to hear that classic tone that's really emanating and humming from the guitars, but at the same time, the minute that you hear Chuck Billy's trademark snarl, it's something that certainly really offers a listener a tremendous amount of solace in the fact that this is a band that was still trying to continue to evolve, while at the same time trying to stick with the things that made them a terrific and well-received band in the first place. Gone were the cynicisms of the fans that perhaps didn't particularly care for the evolutionary patterns that were taken by albums such as, The Ritual. And this was definitely something where everything seemed to really come full circle. Now, as of Demonic, their last album, there was a lot of conflict that was based around some poor business decisions that were handled on fronts that were not Testament themselves, to the point of about $44 million, which really, really hurt the distribution and the promotional tools that were used for these albums. It's a good reason why in this age of the late 90s, where there was very, very limited internet and something where it's certainly not what it is here in 2014, there's a good chance that you winked and missed the fact that this album was released, and it was one that became tremendously difficult to find very shortly after. Now, even with that said, this was an album that was really, really beloved by a lot of different individuals for songs such as Eyes of Wrath and Careful What You Wish For. Tracks like this definitely seem to maintain the same flavor that you heard from albums such as The New Order or Practice What You Preach. So this was definitely an idea that seemed to really swirl around as trademark as far as Testament is concerned. That's really the best word used to describe this album, is trademark or classic, because this album has just a terrific, terrific tone to it. It's one of those underappreciated, underrated gems in Testament's discography that is unfortunate, because it's definitely an album that, if it would not have been plagued with as many problems kind of outside of the studio as it was, probably would have done a lot better. This was an album that not only charted in Germany, but rather one that easily could have probably charted in the high 100s here in America, and would have really maintained a level of success during a time period where that really didn't seem to be the case whatsoever. Now, this is also one that had included some trademark add-ons, such as Andy Sneap doing some engineering work, and we definitely see how that has definitely affected the band positively, considering Sneap's record ever since the 1990s. This is also something, though, that would be the last Testament album for quite some time. The band decided to embark on a tour, and then Chuck Billy, the vocalist, was eventually diagnosed with cancer, and this was something that put the band kind of on hold. Now, after this occurred, we were able to get some different little things, such as some licensed or unlicensed greatest hits albums, and then a re-release of the first disc that was done kind of against a lot of better judgment, considering this is something where the update actually sounds a whole hell of a lot worse than the original mixes of a lot of these songs. This is instead something that really comes off as kind of hokey, not to mention the raw intensity of the original recordings is certainly kind of the allure and the charm of them. However, for what we all thought was going to be Testament's ultimate swan song, The Gathering was a good way to go out. This was something that was raw, had a lot of intensity, a lot of energy to it. Not to mention, this was something that was going on during a couple of the members' side projects. Dragonborn, I believe, is the name, or Dragon Lore. You'll have to check my facts on that one, considering it's been quite some time since I've seen anything of the sort from that band, considering I think it was a one-off project. And because of that, they were able to add some of those resonances and some of those tones to these tracks, which certainly gave it a darker edge to it, which is something that Testament was always pretty well equipped at doing anyhow, whenever you consider some of the darker subject matter that they explored on their opening 3 to 4 albums. That being said, though, The Gathering is one of those underrated gems that if you have the opportunity to get it, if you were lucky enough to find it, principally it's going to probably be used at a store, either that or if you're fortunate enough to find a new copy, it's certainly one to pick up, one that I highly recommend. From the latter portions of their discography, this certainly has a lot of potential, not to mention it's a shame that we didn't get the opportunity to have it be more widespread and widely available. And it's a shame that based around some of the things that happened health-wise, that this was the last album from the band that we saw for a while. But Testament, like the Mighty Phoenix, came back. It's time for us to talk about their very first return album. And we're going to do that next, so stay tuned.